Hey friends, how's it going? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Gabby, and today I'm going to be doing my March wrap-up. In the month of March, I read a total of 23 books. I read so much manga, I read so many novels. I actually had a really great reading month in the month of March. It's probably one of the best reading months I've had in a while. I did work on a number of different vlogs this month, including reading RM's favorite books, RM of BTS, who is one of my biases in BTS. And I was able to read so many different exciting books in this vlog. And then I also did a reading vlog where I was reading some new release thrillers. I also did like an extended version of this vlog for Patreon where I included another book, episode 13. And then I also did a reading vlog towards the end of the month where it was a reading vlog where I couldn't stop reading until I found a 5-star book, which was very fun, but also kind of chaotic and stressful, but it made for a fun time. And then at the end of the month, over on my Patreon, I hosted my first ever 48-hour Patreon exclusive readathon called Screaming Color, where for the last weekend of March, we just spent the weekend reading books with green on the cover. And it was a really fun time. I also did another Patreon exclusive video this month that was me and Rachel kind of predicting and reacting to Taylor Swift's Eras tour. And that video was an hour long because for the first 30 minutes, we spent the time predicting what we wanted to happen on the tour. And that was before, we filmed that part before the tour started. And then in the second half of the video, we kind of react to everything that has happened on the tour so far. So those are all of the videos I've been working on this month. I'll have everything linked down below if you missed anything or if you'd like to check anything out. But yeah, before we do jump into today's video, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to a new sponsor on this channel, which is Factor. If you feel like you're too busy to cook, then I really think Factor would be the perfect thing for you because not only can you skip the trips to the grocery store, you can skip all the food preparations, you can skip the dishes and the mess that it makes when you make food at home, you can skip all of that because Factor delivers you fresh, never frozen, already prepped meals that you can just heat up and have ready to eat within 2 minutes. It's actually pretty incredible how nutritious these meals are and the fact that they're prepared by chefs who know what they are doing in the kitchen, and these meals just get delivered right to your door in these little containers. You can either put them in the microwave for 2 minutes or you can put them in the oven for a few minutes and you have a really nutritious, delicious meal ready to go. They have 34 chef prepared and dietitian approved weekly meals, so there's so many different options to choose from and always something new to try. I think Factor has been such a huge time saver because I know there's always so much pressure around dinner time, like what am I gonna eat, what am I gonna make, and I always do prefer to eat at home, but then I always like dread the mess of like cleaning the whole kitchen and taking all the time to prepare all the ingredients. You know, like it takes a lot of time when you eat at home. But that's what I love so much about Factor is that when I'm busy like doing stuff throughout the day, like if I'm busy trying to edit a video or if I'm doing reading sprints or anything like that, I love having the option to just throw in a meal into the microwave and have it ready within 2 minutes, and it's so freaking good. I have had a few of their meals over the last couple of days and I'm genuinely so impressed by the flavor. Like the flavor on these meals is incredible. And the exciting news is that Factor is now owned by HelloFresh, and they have so many meal options to choose from, so there really is something for everyone. I personally really love the switching back and forth between these two brands, and I love what both of them have to offer, and now you can enjoy both brands at a discount with me. So you can head to factor75.com or click the link down below and use my code gabbyreads50 for 50% off your first Factor box. And once again, that's factor75.com. You can use my code gabbyreads50 to get 50% off your first box. 50%. That's incredible. I think that Factor is definitely worth checking out. I was genuinely so impressed by how fresh the food tasted and how good the flavor was. I think it's definitely worth checking out. So thank you so much to Factor for sponsoring today's video. And now let's get back to the wrap up. All right, so as I mentioned before, I was working on a number of different reading vlogs throughout the month. So I will have all of the vlogs that I've been working on in the description if you missed any of them, but I figured I would start with the manga and the graphic novels because I've been reading so many different mangas and graphic novels this month. I had 11 manga and graphic novels that I read this month, and honestly, the manga was delivering this month. Like, I read so much great things. Let me tell you about them. So this month I was able to read 4 volumes of Blood on the Tracks. I was able to read volumes 8, 9, 10, and 11, and out of these ones, I think volume 9 and number 11. Oh my gosh, dude, this series! I know I've been talking about this series in basically every single wrap up of this year because I just continued to love this series, and all I have left to read is volume 12, and then I'm pretty much caught up on the series. And this series is about, you know, a mom and her son, and they have a very odd relationship. Honestly, it feels very like Norman Bates, you know, it feels very like Psycho vibes. These books are all considered like horror and kind of like mystery thriller vibes, and I would highly recommend this series. I just think it's so well done. I feel like these volumes are also very easy to read, you know, like they're very quick. A lot of the pages in these are just like really intense like facial expressions. Like this author does a really great job at writing so much emotion just into their facial expressions. It's honestly really incredible. And I think volume 11 is probably one of my favorite volumes in the series so far, just because this story starts to get so unhinged, and I really feel like this volume feels different than all the rest of the volumes that I've read so far. But I gave volume 8 4 stars, volume 9 was 5 stars for me for sure, and then volume 10 was also 4 stars, this one was 4 stars, and then this one, volume 11, was definitely a 5 star. Oh my gosh, this shit is amazing. Alright, the next manga series I was reading this month was Sweat and Soap. I actually finished the entire Sweat and Soap series this month, so I was able to read volumes 9, 10, and 11, and this is the last 3, you know, it's the end of the road. This manga series has just brought me so much joy over these last few months. I'm sure you're sick and tired of hearing me talk about Sweat and Soap, but for the last time, Sweat and Soap. It's incredible. It's an office romance story between these two leads who do, yes, they very much remind me of Kath and Levi from Fangirl. They just really give me those vibes, like if Kath and Levi were like a little bit older, because she's got her cute little like bangs and her cute little glasses, and he just gives me major Levi vibes. And I don't know, I just love and adore this series so much. I think if you want to start the Sweat and Soap series, I would say that it does feel a little weird right at the beginning or for the first volume or two, but then once you get into it, these two have the most wholesome relationship, and it's just so freaking beautiful. And I actually think that volume 9 might be my like favorite volume in the entire series, because I just love the way that these two communicate with each other. And even though she has a lot of things from her past that are really difficult for her to talk about, I just love the way that she's able to like open up to him and still talk about things. And I just felt like it was so realistic, and I guess I really related to a lot of the things that were happening in volume 9. And I also really loved one of the new characters that was introduced in volume 9. I also thought she was really cool. So like, I don't know, I just really love this series, but all the last 3 of these were 5 stars for me. Like, I freaking adore this series with my whole heart, and I'm gonna miss it so much. I was also finally able to read Given volume 2. This is the second volume in a series that I just started reading last month, and this one is a series about a group of these boys who they're all in a band together. They all, you know, play instruments and guitar and drums and all that, and they're in a band together, and then it's a romance between some of the boys in the band. And this volume was so precious. I ended up giving this one 4.5 out of 5 stars because I think I liked this second one even more than the first volume. Like, they have some really great chemistry with these boys, and oh my gosh, like the comparison of like the guitar strings to like their heart, like, oh my god, I'm freaking soft. It was so cute. And so I can't wait to read more from this series. Like, it was such a delight. I also got around to reading The Liminal Zone, I think is how you say it, right? The Liminal Zone. This is Junji Ito's newest manga that he's come out with recently, and this one's actually a horror collection of short stories, and so there are 4 short stories in this collection. And I'm sad to say this, but I think this is my least favorite Junji Ito that I've read so far, because I really wasn't connecting with any of the short stories in this collection. And I don't know, I feel like Junji Ito, though, he's an author that really thrives in like the short story format, and so that's why I was kind of surprised that I didn't end up liking this one as much, because I only kind of liked the first 2 stories, but even still, the first 2 stories, I thought they were just okay, and then the second 2 stories I really didn't like. Like, I thought that they were just kind of like, what the fuck am I reading right now, but like not in a good way. And so I don't know, I ended up giving this one 2 stars. It's definitely my least favorite thing that I've read from Junji Ito so far, which is kind of a bummer, but it also does not put me off from reading his other stuff, because I just think he has some of the most unique ideas that I've ever seen in horror books, and I still stand by that. This was very unique and very weird, and exactly what I would expect from from Junji Ito. It just wasn't really my cup of tea this time around, so I gave this one 2 stars. Then I also finally read Something is Killing the Children Volume 1. This is the first volume in a series, I think, and this one was really interesting because we're following this small town where there's this monster there, and the monster is killing only the children, and only the children can actually see the monster. And so it's interesting because all the adults in the town, like, there will be moments and like scenes where the monster will be like right above the adult and they like don't even know because they can't even see it. And so it's really interesting because in this story we're following this woman named Erica Slaughter, and she's like the only adult that can see the monsters, and we don't know why she can see them, but she's here. And so she shows up in this town and she's gonna like try to help save the kids essentially. And this story was just really interesting. My only one nitpick with this story is that sometimes it was kind of hard to read because it would go back and forth with like the way that it was told. I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but basically like sometimes the panels would read like down the page, but then at other times the panels would read like across the page, if that makes sense. And it was just a little confusing because see, like in a panel like this actually reads this way, like all across the page. But then in some other panels, it would read like just down the page, and I don't know, I thought it was a little bit confusing if I'm being honest sometimes. But other than that small nitpick, I had so much fun reading this book, and this book was honestly way more graphic and gory than I was anticipating. Like, I was kind of surprised by the stuff that I was seeing in this. I was like, oh shit. And so this is definitely not a read for children, you know, like this is definitely horror, and this is scary, and it's weird, but it's also just so intriguing. Like, I'm definitely really invested in the characters, I'm invested in the town. I feel like I just immediately got pulled into this world, and so I'm really enjoying it. I think I ended up giving this one 4 stars, but I definitely do want to continue with the series very soon. Alright, and then the last manga that I ended up reading this month was Killing Stalking Volume 1, and this was everything. This was everything. I loved it so much. Oh my gosh. But let me warn you, okay? Let me say this. This is a really, really dark and disturbing and gory and graphic in every way possible horror story. And basically what happens in this book is that we're following this guy right here. He's a stalker, and he's really in love with this other boy, and he's like obsessed with him in a way that's like really unhinged and kind of creepy. And so the story in this book is that this stalker dude breaks into his home because, you know, he's a stalker and he's creepy, and then he finds out that this boy that he thinks that he's obsessed and in love with is not exactly who he thought he was, and then shit gets really weird. You know, I've seen so many of my friends raving about this book lately, and I was kind of nervous going into this because I was like, I don't really know if this is going to be my thing or not. I just wasn't really sure what to expect going in, but oh my gosh, I'm obsessed. I get it now. It's so fascinating. And like, yes, this book is very dark and disturbing. It is very graphic, not only with like, it's sexually graphic, but it's violently graphic. Like there's just so much happening in this. Like, this is definitely a hard, like 18 plus read, if you know what I mean. But there's just something about it. Like, I read this entire 400-page story within like 40 minutes because I could not put it down. It was like, I couldn't peel my eyes away from the page because I was like, what is gonna happen next? I feel like these characters were just so interesting to read about because they were very hard to predict like what they would do next. And I don't know, it's like one of those books where like it's a train wreck, but you can't look away from it. You're like, what am I reading? And like, do I feel a little bit like a weirdo for giving this 5 stars? I mean, a little bit, but it's also so good. Like, I can't deny how interested I was in this story while I was reading it, and like, I cannot wait to read future volumes of this because I'm like, what is going on? So yeah, I guess this could be considered one of those guilty pleasure reads that I don't think I would really recommend to people, and if you decide to pick this up because of me, no, you didn't. I don't know what you're talking about. Right, and then on to all the books that I read this month. I read a total of 12 books, and I thought I would also mention some of my DNFs here. I did have one DNF this month, and that was Goodnight Pun Pun. This is the first volume in a series, and from what I understand, this is just like a coming of age kind of story about this little dude called Pun Pun, and he's like in middle school, and I don't know, I don't fucking understand this series. Like, I don't understand what I'm supposed to be feeling. It's just kind of awkward and weird and uncomfortable, and I just didn't like it. I really didn't like it, so I decided to DNF it about halfway through because I was like, what the fuck am I reading? Like, I don't want to be reading this, so that happened. I also decided to DNF Sizzle Reel. Sadly, this is one of the ones that I ended up pulling for my Patreon prompt. It was to read a book with an onomatopoeia in the title, and so I picked Sizzle Reel for that prompt. And this one, I just wasn't a huge fan of this one, you know, and it sucks because I honestly probably might have put this in like a 5-star prediction because we're following like a 24-year-old girl who's a cinematographer, and she's also like coming to terms with the fact that she might be bisexual, and she's kind of like navigating her sexuality. But there was just something about this book that was driving me nuts. Like, I did not like the writing style, and I also thought a lot of the characters right from the beginning were just kind of obnoxious and didn't really feel like real people. Like, I don't even know how to explain it, but it just like, the writing was not flowing in the way that I needed it to flow, and so I gave up on this one about 60 pages in. And then I also did have a DNF for Spells for Forgetting, and this is another one that I thought, you know, like maybe it could be something that I would love, but also this one was definitely a little bit outside of my comfort zone because this one does lean a little bit more into like the fantasy kind of like magical realism, you know, aspect of things, and that's usually very hit or miss for me anyways. And so sadly this one was kind of a miss. I don't know, I feel like this book, it read really young adult, even though I don't think it was intended to be, because I think they were supposed to be like in their 30s. And also like anytime some of the magic in this book started to get explained, I just felt like my eyes were like glazing over, and I just like, I don't care. Like, I don't care. All right, and then the first novel that I read this month was 1984 by George Orwell, and this was the first book that I ended up reading in the video that I worked on this month that was reading RM's book recommendations. And 1984, you know, it's a classic that I've never actually had to read, even though I know a lot of people had this as like required reading in high school, like my sister included. And I was pretty impressed by this, to be honest. I feel like a lot of times with classics, they are either very hit or miss for me, but I feel like this one for the most part was a hit. I think I've decided on giving this book around 3.5 stars because it wasn't the perfect book for me, and I feel like a lot of times there were just moments where the writing style in general was just really hard for me because there are so many pages like this where it's just constant info dumping and it's just dense paragraphs after dense paragraphs, and I'm like, there is no reason for a book to be written in this way. Like, it can be written in a much more engaging way. So like the writing style of it was not my favorite, but the concepts in this book and like the thought-provoking ideas in this book definitely make sense to me why this book is as popular as it is and why it's considered a classic. I think this book is very thought-provoking, and it has one of those endings where like it just gives you like chills all over your body because you're like, what the fuck? You know, so like I can definitely see why this book is as popular as it is. It's just the writing style in particular that I had some issue with. But overall, I'm really glad that I finally read 1984. I do think it's one of those really thoughtful books that like stays on your mind for a long time. I also, for that same video, I ended up reading Kim Ja-young, born 1982, and this one is also another very thought-provoking book. This one is about this woman, and it really follows this woman from her childhood into her teens, into her early adulthood, and then even into her marriage and when she's having children. So we just kind of follow this woman throughout most of her life. And this book was really interesting. Like, it was written in a really cool way because it almost read like nonfiction at times, because it would give you like facts about what was going on in South Korea during that time period of her life. And it almost read like nonfiction because it would give you these like statistics of like, oh, this is how many women, you know, actually work after they have children, or like different things like that. It was actually really cool because I felt like I was learning so much about South Korea and like what it's like to be a woman in South Korea. And it was also just really like relatable and like beautiful. Like, this book has a lot of really great feminist themes that really surprised me. Like, I just wasn't expecting there to be so many deep messages in this book. I really appreciated the talk about, you know, motherhood in this book and how all women are like kind of pressured into motherhood sometimes, even though that's not something that every woman wants in their life. And I don't know, I was just really impressed by not only like the feminist themes, but just the really thought-provoking discussion about different things in life and like why there are certain traditions that we have in the world, and specifically in like Korean culture too. It was just really interesting. I gave this one 4 stars. And then in that video, I also ended up reading The Stranger, which is another classic that I had not ever read before. And this one is really interesting because you're following from the perspective of a man who's taken the life of another man, and now his life might be getting put into jeopardy because of his decisions. And this story was also really interesting. You know, I'm not gonna lie, because the plot of this book was very boring. Like, I think the reading experience of this one was pretty boring. boring, even though it is quite short. Like the audiobook for this one was only 3 hours long. Like I was pretty impressed by how short the story was, but also I can definitely see why people would like this book and why RM especially would like this book, because it is very thought-provoking. This book definitely gives me a lot of the same feelings that I had when I read Notes on an Execution, which was one of my top favorite books of last year, but it definitely brings up a lot of the same ideas and a lot of the same feelings from that book. And that is like, you know, topics of like what makes a life worth living, or what makes a life valuable, or like why do we do the things that we do? And like if we were born into different circumstances, like could our lives have been different, you know? Like it's one of those like existential, like makes you think about your life in like a bigger picture, and like makes you think about the universe, and like, you know, it's definitely one of those stories where it'll make you have one of those like existential crisis, like thinking like, what is the point of life? I get it. I get why this book is so popular. I think for me it's about a 3.5 to a 4 stars, because again, the writing style in this book and the plot itself was not my favorite. Like I think it was like watching paint dry in this book a little bit at times, even though it was only 3 hours long. It was just, there were some passages that just bored me to tears. Like it was so slow. But then again, there was just some passages in this book that were so beautiful and that stuck with me so much that it's like I'm still thinking about this book weeks later, you know? So like how could I not give it a good rating when I'm still thinking about it that long? And then the last book that I ended up reading in that video was Almond, and this one ended up being a 5-star book for me. All around, I was very impressed by RM's book recommendations and how well that video ended up going, because I found so many new books that were very thought-provoking and very interesting, and this one was no different. In this story, we're following this young boy who was born with a brain condition which makes him not feel certain emotions like anger or fear. He's such an interesting character to follow because he doesn't experience these emotions, and so when things happen to him in his life, you know, like the way he reacts might be a little different than what you would expect. Because in this book, it's not a spoiler by the way, this is like mentioned in the blurb, but there's like a really violent incident where he watches his mom and his grandma get murdered right in front of him. And you know, usually in a situation like that, you would be experiencing a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear and a lot of anger, but because he doesn't experience those emotions, it's really interesting to follow from a character like him, because he's more, you know, wondering why is this happening? Like why are these people doing this? And I feel like I just related to this character in so many ways, and I love the way that he speaks about certain things. I also just love the setting in this story, because him and his mom own this used bookstore, and I love the way that he talks about books, and he feels like he can understand more about people and other people in the world because of the books that he reads. This book just has so many beautiful ass moments with quotes that just stop and make you think. Like I love this one passage when he's talking about the word love, and he says, "Can the word love be thrown around so casually like that?" And he says, "From what I understood, love was an extreme idea, a word that seemed to force something undefinable into the prison of letters. But the word was used so easily, so often. People spoke of love so casually just to mean the slightest pleasure or thanks." And like, I love that so much, and I've always thought the same, like that the word love is just used so casually. I just think this book was absolutely fascinating. I just connected so much with this character and this story. I just fucking loved it. I gave this 5 stars. I loved it so much. Oof, unlike the next book that I read this month, which was The Drift by CJ Tudor, which was my only 1-star book that I had this month. And I know, it might sound harsh that I gave this book 1 star, but I had to give this book 1 star because I didn't find anything enjoyable about this reading experience, and I was sad. Because CJ Tudor I consider her to be one of my favorite thriller authors, you know, like I've enjoyed a lot of the thrillers and the horror stuff that she's come out with. And so I went into this having some pretty high expectations, and so maybe that's on me, but I just did not have a good time with this book. This book, it's so confusing too, because we're following the perspective of 3 different characters, but it's confusing because with those 3 different characters, they're each interacting with about 4 to 5 characters each, and so there's a total of about 15 to 20 different characters that you're supposed to be trying to remember in this book. There are just way too many goddamn characters in this book, and I just did not care about any of them. But it's also kind of confusing because there are 2 perspectives that are from 2 different females that are in these cars. Like they're both trapped in these cars, and then we get the point of view of this guy who's at this place called the Retreat or whatever. The 2 female point of views were so goddamn similar that I just kept getting their timelines mixed up. Like I kept getting their point of views mixed up because it was essentially like the same thing was happening to both of them in both of the timelines, but they were interacting with different people. Like it was just so freaking confusing. Like I don't know if I was just stupid, but I was like, this is so confusing. Like why is it written in this way? And then also I just feel like the story itself was so boring. Like it's so confusing to me because every time I see somebody review this book in a positive way, they'll say that this story was so action-packed and that they were on like the edge of their seat the whole time. But I feel the complete exact opposite, because I feel like the entire time I was reading this, I felt like I was just waiting for something to happen. And so like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I just did not like this book at all. It felt like watching one of the more like boring episodes of The Walking Dead where you're just like waiting for something interesting to happen. But then I ended up reading The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz, and this was absolutely incredible. Oh my god, this book was everything. So in The Writing Retreat, we have one of my favorite book premises that we've had in a while, okay? Because we have these female writers, and we're particularly following these two female writers named Alex and Ren, and they have been best friends for like 8 years or something like that, but they've recently had this huge falling out where like they're not friends anymore, and it's like there's this awkward thing between them, and they're both really, really obsessed with this author named Rosa. She's like this really well-known, wealthy, incredible female author, and Rosa, she's having this competition where she's gonna be selecting different female writers in America to come to her estate, which is like very Hill House vibes, by the way. Like her estate is just very like, it's a creepy ass haunted mansion kind of vibe, and she's gonna be inviting some female writers to come and stay at her estate and compete against each other to write the next great novel. And this book is just so, okay, because you know immediately, right, that not only does our protagonist get picked for this writing retreat, but so does Ren, okay? So does her bestie Ren. And so we get this amazing like tension between them this whole time, because they're like, you know, they just had this awkward like friendship that fell apart, and now they're gonna have to stay at this estate together, and the estate place is creepy and weird, and there's unexplained things happening that they can't explain. I feel like the vibes in this book were very much like Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. Like I was getting the same kind of like atmosphere of like this creepy ass place where they're staying, but also I love the fact that we're following a bunch of writers in this book. I love the idea of like them competing against each other to try and write the next novel. Like I just think that's so entertaining. This book is absolutely unhinged. Like it is so chaotic. It is so unlike most of the other thrillers that I'm reading these days. Like I feel like this book was so hard to predict. It was just so chaotic, and like, what the fuck am I reading right now? Like, it just kept twisting and turning, and I would recommend do not read this full premise on the inside here, because I feel like some of the premise, especially towards that bottom half, it really spoils you for some things that happen much later on in the story. But this was 5 stars for me. This was incredible. This was so chaotic. It was so disturbing. I just loved it so much. I was so invested the whole time in the relationship between Alex and Ren. Like, they are one of my favorite, like, relationships to be reading about recently in a thriller, because they were just so toxic and just like, oh my god, but they were so fascinating. Like I could not look away. It was just so entertaining. Like this is everything that I'm looking for in a thriller, you know? Like Julia Bartz, she fucking did it. So that was incredible. And the fact that this is a debut novel, like absolutely insane. I will be reading anything this author comes out with. Oh gosh, unlike this next book, I ended up reading The Golden Spoon next. And sadly, this one was a major disappointment for me as well, because this one is described as Only Murders in the Building meets The Maid. And basically what's happening in this book is that we're following these people who are going to be contestants on this baking show. But then somebody turns up dead in the baking competition, and it becomes quite a bit of a murder mystery. But for me, I feel like this book was just so boring. And it's like, maybe I went in with the wrong expectation, because this is not, it's really not like a mystery thriller. It's definitely more of like a slow burn, cozy mystery where it's mostly about the baking show and not really that much about murder. So maybe I just went in with the wrong expectations. I don't know, but I thought this was so boring, and I didn't really care about any of the characters. Like there were no characters that I was like, ooh, that person's cool. It was like they were all just kind of very bland and generic, and I couldn't tell them apart from each other. And it sucks because I feel like I just don't even really have that much to say about this. Like it was just not that great. I feel like at the end of every chapter, I feel like the author would almost try to hint that something interesting was about to happen, but then at the beginning of the next chapter, it would like quickly explain away any, you know, things that you had. It was just like, oh, never mind. It's not going anywhere. And so I gave this one 2 stars. I just wasn't a fan. I don't know. I just expected so much more from this. And then I also ended up reading episode 13, which this is one that I read in the extended like Patreon exclusive reading vlog that I did, and this one also ended up being quite a bummer. This one, oh my gosh, this one had so much potential with that premise, you know, because we're following this crew of people who are a bunch of paranormal investigators, and they have this TV show where they're going to be going in and trying to explore this place that is haunted. The premise of this sounded like absolutely everything, because I love the idea of following like a paranormal investigative team. I just think that sounds so fun, and I ended up listening to this one on audio, and the audiobook at first, I thought it was absolutely incredible because it's a full cast audiobook, audiobook, and there's a lot of really cool like sound effects and there's like music, so it feels like you're actually like watching a TV show. And this entire book is written in a way where it's not really written like a conventional story, because it's all just like articles and it's interviews and it's, you know, different things like that. So we don't get any like conventional style of storytelling in this book. This book just did not work for me because most of the time I was finding it to be very kind of like boring and repetitive. Like I was just like, okay, like when is something gonna actually happen though? And then, oh my gosh, the audiobook was so frustrating. At times the audiobook was freaking fantastic, right? And at times I was like, oh my gosh, this is just making the experience feel more realistic and even more cool. But then at other times, and like most of the time, the audiobook had some acting on it that was just super cringe. Like there were some scenes where it would be like she was hysterically crying in her car or she was hysterically laughing. They would actually have the actor like do that, you know, like she would be like hysterically crying on the audiobook or whatever, and it just sounded so cheesy and like so terrible. And then there would be some scenes where I thought it was supposed to be like a really creepy scene, but they would have this like weird music playing in the background that almost made it feel so cheesy at times. And so I don't know, I feel like almost because the audiobook was so overproduced, it like kind of took me out of it sometimes and kind of ruined the story for me. This was just a totally forgettable experience. Like it was so just chaotic and all over the place, but in a way that was like not fun. And so I ended up giving this one 2 stars. I don't know. All right, the next book that I ended up reading this month was The Neighbor Favor by Christina Forrest. And I'm so glad that I finally read this. This is like one of my most anticipated romances because in this story we're following this girl right here who is like a major book lover. Like she reads a lot of books, and then it's about her story with this other guy who's also a book lover and an author. She reaches out to him via email because she's a huge fan of his fantasy book that he's written. And so she starts emailing him, and they just kind of go back and forth, right, for months with emails. Like they just start building this bond and this relationship with emails. And then one day he's like, I can't do this anymore. You don't really know who I am. And he completely ghosts her. And it kind of sucks because, you know, he writes under a pen name, so she doesn't know who he really is and like all that kind of stuff. And so then we flash forward to a little bit of a time later. She's currently living in New York and she needs a date for her sister's wedding, essentially. And she's been really interested in this new guy who just moved in, who's her neighbor. The thing that I didn't realize about this book is that, you know, once they start talking, like he realizes right away that she's the one that he's been talking to in these emails, but she does not know that he is the author that she's been, you know, talking to in emails. And the thing that made me like, about this book is the fact that he does not tell her right away, you know, and a lot of this story is him being like, oh, it was like perfect opportunities for him to tell her the truth, but then something happened, and so he just doesn't tell her for a long time. And so in a way, it kind of feels like catfishing, like just a little bit. And so that part of the story kind of drove me nuts because I really am like not cool with that, or I think that's so like shady to like not tell her who you really are, especially if you know. It just feels like she's being lied to, or it feels like a betrayal, you know? So like that aspect of the book did drive me a little crazy, but otherwise, oh my god, this book was still everything. Like I absolutely loved their chemistry. I loved their shared love of books, and the way that they would just geek out over books together and talk about them was so cute. I also just loved, you know, the setting of like New York. Like there were scenes where they would go to like Strand bookstore together, and like I just, the New York vibes were everything. I also loved the relationship that she had with her sisters in this book. Like it was just so cute. Like this romance was honestly so top tier for me in every way. And so I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. And the only reason I couldn't give it the full 5 stars was because of how much it bothered me that this man would not tell her. It just felt like such a betrayal that I can't wholeheartedly give this 5 stars, you know? But otherwise, I really loved this book. Like I really did. It was so cute. I highly recommend. It's adorable. And then the next book that I ended up reading this month is How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix, which, yes, this is my BookTube book club pick for the month of March. If you are wondering, I'm going to be doing the live show very soon with Gavin and Lexi on April 1st. I will have the link down below in the description so you can save the link, but it's going to be coming up very soon this weekend, so I hope you'll be able to join us. This story is like a haunted house story, kind of, but it's not really what I was expecting, because in this story we're following these siblings named Luis and Mark, and basically what happens is right at the beginning of this book, they find out that their parents have passed away, and so they're gonna have to take care of this house that their parents left behind. And their mom was really into, you know, collecting like dolls and puppets and like clowns and just a bunch of different things. The story was interesting. It just wasn't exactly what I was expecting it to really be about. I think it was really difficult at times to read about these two characters because they were just really frustrating to read about, even though I do think that there are a lot of sibling relationships that are actually like this in real life, and I know that that's really sad, but it was also just like, oh my god, like both of them were just driving me absolutely insane throughout this story. I also do feel like this book was probably about 100 pages too long, because this one is a little bit over 400 pages and I don't really think it needs to be quite that long, but I just have overall such mixed feelings about this one because I do feel like there are some moments in this book that were genuinely like super creepy and kind of terrifying, and I was like, okay, I'm here for that. But then most of the time I couldn't help but feeling like it just kind of felt really cheesy and ridiculous and like not in the most fun way. So like, I don't know, I feel like I'm probably gonna end up giving this around 3 stars. Alright, and the next book that I read was Soulmates by Susan Lee, and this was actually the first book that I read for my, you know, Screaming Color readathon, where we read books with green on the cover because there's quite a bit of green happening here. And this one is a young adult contemporary novel where we're following this young girl named Hannah, and she is Korean American, but she's currently living in San Diego. And she used to be best friends with this guy named Jacob Kim, who eventually, like, he used to live in San Diego with her, but he eventually went and moved back to South Korea, and then he became a really big K-drama star in South Korea. And she is kind of like pissed that, well, she's not pissed, but she's kind of pissed that like Korean culture is like blowing up because she doesn't understand it. Like, she's really not into K-pop or K-dramas or any like Korean things, and so she's kind of like, what the fuck is all the hype about? Like, she just doesn't get it, you know? But then in this story, Jacob is going to be coming back to San Diego for the summer because he's going to be taking some time off, and so then it's going to be about how they're reconnecting again, and she's feeling like she is getting back into her Korean culture. And this book was just, oh, it was so cute. I'm usually not the biggest fan of friends to lovers or like young adult romances, and so this was a little bit outside of like my comfort zone for something that I would usually pick up, but honestly I'm so glad that I did because these two were just so adorable. I also love the discussion in this book about how difficult it can be to be a celebrity, but like especially in South Korea because of all of the intense like media training they make these people go through. You know, like he talks about how he's always under so much pressure to like be perfect and to respond a certain way and look a certain way in photos, and you know, I can definitely see that with a lot of different like Korean celebrities, that they're just put under a different kind of pressure than I think most celebrities are used to. So I really appreciated the discussion in this book about how difficult that is for him and how much of a toll it can take on your mental health to try and be a certain way all of the time. But also I just really loved their, you know, romance in this book and their friendship. Like, they just had a really cute friendship throughout this story that was just making my heart freaking soar. So this was a 4 out of 5 for me. I had a really great time. I thought it was so cute. And then the last book that I ended up reading this month was Small Game, which this is another one that I ended up reading during my Patreon readathon because, again, so much green on the cover here. And this one is another book that I think has such a cool premise. It's kind of like a mystery thriller, but it honestly reads a little bit more of like a slow burn. It's kind of written more in like a literary fiction style. But in this story, we're following this crew they're gonna be on this survival show in the wilderness. And they're basically gonna get like blindfolded and dropped into the middle of the wilderness, and then they're gonna have to survive for however long. And this story was so interesting because I think the story was really well written. I thought the writing itself was actually really good. Like, I thought the writing was really beautiful. It was really interesting. There were a lot of really good characters in this book, and there was one particular relationship in this book that I was really invested in throughout the whole story. But at the same time, I feel like this book, it just wasn't exactly what I was expecting. Like, I thought there would be more moments of like, I don't know, intensity, or I thought there would be a little bit more things happening because it's all about like a survival show. It just wasn't as intense, I guess, as I was hoping for. And then also I thought the ending was just very underwhelming in a way where it's just like, oh, okay, like I guess it's over now, you know, like it just kind of ended and I just wanted more out of the ending. And so I think I ended up giving this one around a 3 star. It wasn't a bad book, and I would definitely read more from this author in the future because I really did like the writing of it. But overall, I found this one to just be fine. It was just okay. All right, so those are all of the books that I read this month. Oh my gosh, I feel like I had such a great reading month. Like, not only was I able to read a lot of the books that I had on my TBR this month, but also I just feel like I found so many new favorite things that I loved this month. I was really happy with all of the reading vlogs that I worked on this month. Like, I just had so much fun working on all of them, and hosting my first ever Patreon exclusive 48-hour readathon was genuinely so much fun. Like, it was even more fun than I thought it would be to host the trivia on the first day with the reading sprints and just hanging out with everyone for the whole whole weekend. Like, it just really made my whole month, to be honest. If you are curious, I do plan to host another round of Screaming Color. I'm pretty sure it'll be in June, and I'm pretty sure in June we'll be reading books with blue on the cover for a whole weekend. If you would like to know more about that, my Patreon will be linked down below. I'll probably be announcing the June information at some point in the next few months or weeks or whatever. But I had such a blast. I hope you had a really great March. Let me know, how many books did you read in the month of March? Did you find any new favorites? And if you did, what are they? If you've read any of the books that I read in the month of March and you have thoughts about them, I would love to know. If you want to leave me a comment and let me know what you think about any of these books. And I also hope you'll be able to join me for the How to Sell a Haunted House live show that's happening very soon this weekend. I'm so excited to have Gavin and Lexi on the channel again. And yeah, that is a wrap on March, so thank you so much for watching as always, and I will see you very soon with another video. Bye!